All right, Qu'appelle, thanks for joining us on Grimerica. This is our regular show, and we'll have a great chat. We just passed a, a special
Regular
day
show?
last Friday. It didn't. What's that?
Regular show? Is this so the other show is irregular?
Yeah, it's outlawed the other one. So
Oh, so this is the unoutlawed.
yeah,
Yeah.
but we just passed a special day. I didn't realize it was actually a statutory holiday. I guess was it a new holiday? I mean, I just oh
It
man, it's
ain't a
been
stat. It
It
ain't a
is.
stat here.
It is a stat holiday depending on
the
for whom.
province.
Yeah, I depending on where and for whom. I have a list that I could pull up.
Oh, okay. So, and then you're calling it the Shame Day, which I love. And I don't know if you know, Darren's book is called A Canadian Shame. So
I did
it's
know that. I have not
yeah, yeah,
to read it, but I did know that.
yeah.
So
It's got us some good timelines in there. And I'm going to pull some quotes out of that book probably because it's important for timelines and this sort of middle of the road perspective in a way. Well, I don't know if we could call it middle of the road, but some
I
of the
found
blogs I've been reading on Nevermore have sort of been really what I've been thinking about, trying to stay like because there's a bunch of people that are pushing back now against what they see as kind of like this woke thing happening about
mhm,
the residential schools, and then there's a bunch of people, of course, on the other side that are sort of anti-colonialism, and they're
mhm,
putting their orange shirts on
mhm.
and signaling their virtues, which some of it is legit, I guess, but it's hard to know where to land on this one. Kind of where we cross over
Very-
a little bit with all these things. So
Yeah, it's very tricky, and I think it would be helpful for me to just say a bit about who I am and where I'm coming from and all of
yeah,
this.
yeah.
So I am an anarchist. I grew up in Ottawa, and just um, just young enough to have experienced the kind of the tail end of the anti-globalization movement, which is a time which was really exciting. So I got involved with political activism at a young age, um, and I have been involved in supporting Indigenous struggles for many years. Highly involved in the anti-pipeline movement in BC. I'm on Wet'suwet'en territory right now. Highly involved in that. For over 10 years now. Actually, I first came out here in 2012. Um, I was at Standing Rock, was at Elsie Pogdog, and a bunch of others that people may not have heard of. Um, and I also have been doing ceremony for a long time. So I'm a white guy. I'm Euro Canadian, is the term, I guess. But I've been doing sweat lodge ceremonies, fasts, and Sundance ceremonies for over 10 years. Um, and the reason that I bring that up is because I think that some people who are coming at this from the alternative media, what uh, you know, where some people might be pushing back quite hard against the anti woke stuff, is people have no doubt noticed that the slogan of that officially called the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, informally known as Orange Shirt Day, which I call Shame Day. The slogan for it is "Every Child Matters," which is kind of a knockoff of Black Lives Matter, quite evidently. And so I think that's interesting. And I wanted to read a quote from Chomsky. He says, "That's the whole point of good propaganda. You want to create a slogan that nobody's going to be against and that everybody's going to be for. Nobody knows what it means because it doesn't mean anything." So every child matters is a very, who could have possibly object to every child matters, but what does it mean? What does, it's not what people, it doesn't say justice. It doesn't say land back. It doesn't say change something. It doesn't say hold, the guilty parties responsible. It's a meaningless slogan. And I think that some people might wonder: is this all a giant psyop? But is the significance of what happened at residential schools being massively overblown? and I wanted to, you know, come out and say that what this started as was a very powerful spiritual movement, spiritual and political movement led by the survivors themselves. So basically, the people that I do ceremony with, a lot of them learned directly from grandfather William Commanda, who is the spiritual grand chief of the Anishinaabe, and was a major leader in this movement to bring to light the abuses that you know that multiple generations of Indigenous people suffered at the hands of residential schools. And you know, it can't be overstated that this was part of a genocidal program to eliminate these cultures. The goal was to, you know, eliminate the Indian and the child, to kill the Indian and the child, and to get them to assimilate to the Euro-Canadian way of life. So it's estimated that over the course of the existence of Indian residential schools, 150,000 children were taken from their homes forcibly. The RCMP, you know, this was forcible. It was not voluntary. So, you know, they're kidnapping. We're talking about kidnapping like every child being official state policy for generations. And, you know, there are many survivors you know, still alive who can tell you what it was like. And this movement for truth and reconciliation began. Actually, one of the things that I posted just recently was a story where I met one of the men who kind of started this movement. He was one of the early people, because they were, you know, trying to get these schools shut down. You know, so back before William Commanda even. You know, there was people like Douglas Cardinal, who's a famous architect. I've heard him speak about his experience in residential schools and trying to get them shut down and everything. And you know, I've heard it from the mouths of many people. You know, the experiences that they experienced. There was horrific abuse. You know, so what I don't like about what the government is doing now with Shame Day is I feel that they are taking control of the narrative, and I guess now that they can't sweep it under the rug anymore. Now that these things are common knowledge, which they absolutely were not, you know, 10, 15 years ago. People didn't know, you know, and maybe they should have, but they didn't, you know. I don't know, maybe both of you could speak about like when you started becoming more aware of these things. Darren, you might have been aware much sooner. I'm not sure, but I think that when there's a PSYOP going on, it's important to think back, you know, like, what do I remember from 10 years ago? As much as we can.
Yeah, I remember 5 or 6, 7 years ago reading or hearing more about it. And I lived in Brentwood Bay for like a year when I was young, and I remembered that was right in like, I don't know where it was compared to a reservation, but there was quite a native influence there, and I remember quite a few feelings about the artwork and about that as a kid, but I didn't understand what was going on at all, obviously. And then we found Kevin Annett, and I don't know if you've read his work at all, but his view is kind of like that the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation thing, was a whitewash. Like, it was basically to cover up all these murders. Like, they didn't go deep enough into the murders and stuff. They just really kept to the definition of genocide, about what you're saying about like erasing the culture. And I think it's sort of about that sort of softer definition of genocide. Darren, you might be able to correct me on that, but it's interesting now because he seems to have, you know, the media in some ways has kind of caught on to his narrative a bit, probably with no more evidence than he had way back when. And it's also caused a big backlash now with a bunch of people saying, well, Western society's done all this good stuff. And, you know, there was abuse in some of these people's houses, and the residential schools was a safer place for them. I mean, now we're seeing all this kind of stuff pop up. But Darren, do you want to make any comments on that?
Well, no, I'm like an assimilated Indian, so I mean, I don't know.
When did you hear about it?
Probably like, I mean, you started first hearing rumors of it, like maybe. I mean, not before we started the podcast. I mean, there was like rumors flying around when I was a kid, but there was no real way to pin it down unless you were like going. But there was people who always like you heard it sort of come up here and there, or especially like in relationship with, because you know we would experience a lot of homeless Indians where I grew up for sure, and you know, as a kid, you're just sort of you don't have a lot of understanding and sometimes compassion for that sort of situation. And I remember more than a few times having it explained to me that all the stuff that they sort of went through, that you know we, but not in any real context or in any, you know, just sort of in passing, so not enough to really understand or retain or really, I mean, I didn't really start digging into it until, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. um and that was really just because when I wanted to dig into it for my own personal understanding, I mean, that's how I ended up writing the book, is just because when I started trying to track all this stuff down, it was pretty hard to find, especially anything that wasn't like a government source. And even the government website doesn't have the any of the original versions of the Indian Act on it. You know, it like cuts off at, I can't remember if it's 69 or 85, but by the time the government website picks up the Indian Act amendments, you know, it's calmed right down. You know, all the bannings, the ceremony, and not being able to leave the place or not being able to sell you shit or blah blah blah. None of that stuff's in there anymore. So um you know, I don't know. The schools are definitely a problem, you know, right back to that. We got guys like, I mean, I don't know if they're related off the top of my head, but Harold Cardinal
Mhm.
doing the red paper back in the 60s and 70s, because I mean, that's when the original Trudeau was going to end the original India Act. He had the white paper back in 69 or 68.
Mhm.
And there's a bunch of them, but you know, the residential schools, they happened. It's a thing. I don't know, you know, I don't know. I don't experience a lot of denialism. Big denialism, I guess, with the grays, the rocks now, or they're fake,
Right.
or I
Yeah.
don't know. I get asked about that, you know, here and there. I mostly just don't engage with it because I really don't give a fuck about whether the grays are real or not. You know, I don't care. I think a bunch of kids died
Mhm.
at those schools. Would they have died anyway because of tuberculosis? You know, there's a certain percentage of them that would have. Obviously, there's a certain percentage of white kids that were dying of tuberculosis back then. You know, that is, to put everything into context, the number one killer in those residential schools, probably, you know, I would say 95 out of 100 was tuberculosis. It wasn't like they were going there. I mean, accidents were happening, and I'm sure some kids were getting killed here and there, and a lot of kids died running away. But mostly, you know, even if they are finding mass graves, it's not because kids were getting executed. It's because they were getting sick and dying at a time when a lot of people were getting sick and dying.
Mhm.
There's also a chance that a lot of those graves were temporary. You know, those kids got buried for a while until their family could get there, and eventually took the remains back and dealt
Mhm.
with them however they're, you know,
Yeah.
and dealt with them. So, but at the end of the day, you know, my opinion is that I don't really care. You know, I kind of just breeze over that in my book. It's like 2 pages. It's like, here's what's going on, here's what they're saying.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, my real problem with it all is land. It's just, that's
Yeah.
all I fucking care about, man. It's
Yeah, yeah.
And
land,
thing
land.
that
It's
talk
not
about.
money. You can't give us money. Money ain't gonna fucking do it. It's land, and the reserves are not fucking close to enough. None of it got fucking 30,000 square kilometers, maybe, or something like that, which is like the equivalent of every reserve in Canada. So they might even got more than that. I should fact check that I'm gonna check that.
And well, and I'm gonna
on how big the Nunavut deal was, but that's the only like. So now that's makes Nunavut outside of a few others that I might be ignorant of at the moment, but that's one of like 1 out of 600 and some that owns their shit, man. They own their shit outright from the government. Recognized Nunavut is fucking owned by not Eskimos, Inuit.
Yeah. And one thing that I think that the Orange Shirt Day is best understood within the context of there was a major Native insurgency right up until COVID. There was, what's called Shut Down Canada, centered on a pipeline struggle, northern BC on Wet'suwet'en territory, and basically there were solidarity actions throughout from coast to coast. Very notably in Tynega, Mohawk territory, blocking a major rail line, and there were port blockades in various cities. And I think that this was very significant, and things had been brewing, for quite a while since, I'd say around the Olympics of 2010, there was a lot of Native resistance that was happening, and there started to be more alliances being built between anarchists and Indigenous sovereigntists, and then this kind of coalesced around what was called Idle No More, which was a protest movement, and at this time, all of this was like the truth was coming out about this stuff, and at that time, there was a very different feel to it. It was something that felt very organic, positive as well. Probably remember the
Yellow Vests. Same time as that, maybe the Yellow Vests were sort of ramping up too in France.
Oh yeah, in France, yeah. I find it actually very interesting that it was the exact date of the end of the Mayan calendar, December 21st, 2012. It was a huge day of action throughout Canada with huge round dances in a bunch of different cities. And there's this growing movement. Definitely had a spiritual component to it. It led to the insurrection against fracking in New Brunswick, which was successful. They were able to, basically send the frackers packing, and it wasn't Indigenous led in Quebec, but they succeeded in Quebec as well. And so it was about land, and this movement still exists. But it was definitely, very thrown off by the whole COVID issue. People, I feel, lost their way, and then conveniently for the government, then they start like seizing control of the narrative around truth and reconciliation. And I think it's kind of like a limited hangout type thing. I don't know if your viewers know this expression, but this is kind of when the CIA will put part of the story out, they'll let it hang out, but they won't tell you the full story. And I think that if they control the narrative, then they're kind of in control of the situation. And I think that a lot of the one thing, I was out of the country at this point, but I believe that it was like maybe in the spring of 2021, there was the supposed discovery of all of these unmarked graves in Kamloops, which incidentally, I think that might be the very same residential school that I visit in this short story that I posted just recently. Although I couldn't be sure because it was a long time ago. But basically, they used a new technology called ground penetrating radar. Well, it's not that new, but they haven't used it for this before. And basically, they're able to identify potential unmarked graves. And the way that it was reported, you would think that they had actually discovered human remains, but that's not the case. And there has been a huge effort to basically focus on this. So, and this was CBC led, and I don't trust the CBC at all. Whenever the CBC is pushing something really hard, then I ask myself the question that you should ask when state media is pushing a particular narrative: is why do they want us to believe this? And so here I have I have a quote from an expert in ground penetrating radar, saying, "At the end of the day, ground penetrating radar alone cannot 100% confirm that there is a grave present or that there's anything in that grave." And now this very well-funded, huge effort has gone on to search for these graves throughout Canada. I found reports from Yukon, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC. There's been major efforts to, and I'd like to just play a quick quote, because this gives you a sense of the type of coverage that they're doing and what the message that it's sending is.
Okay.
Here we go.
Based on the stories that have been shared in our communities, and what we found was heartbreaking and devastating. To date, there are 93 unmarked graves, 79 children, and 14 infants.
Vice Chief Jenny Wolverine said the data confirms what survivors reported for decades.
Most, if not all, of these unmarked graves are believed to be children, and at least 14 of them are believed to be infants. And this is based on the measurements of the soil disturbances that were detected by the GPR.
Don McIntyre.
Okay, so basically, in that case, they were using ground penetrating radar in a cemetery. So the unmarked graves, they were unmarked, I'm thinking, because the grave markers were wooden, and it's long enough, that they've rotted away, basically. So, I consider that pretty misleading. I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of very deceptively worded headlines that would lead you to believe that human remains have been discovered when they have in fact not. And so why would they do this? So I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I think that it is a way. Well, I think it's a way. It's to create racial tension between Indigenous people and rural whites, many of whom are Christian, because there's been a lot of church burnings that happened in the aftermath of this. Church burnings throughout BC, Alberta. It's dozens of churches have been burnt down in Canada. And these church burnings received very sympathetic coverage from the CBC.
From everyone.
I'd
Yeah.
add,
All
like,
all the
Muslims to
mainstream.
that group too. That's like they don't want the Muslims or the fucking rural Christians. Christians or not, let's just put like your average rural white dudes, like the people out in Strathmore and out living on the farms out on there. A lot of them aren't practicing Christians anymore, but we'll just put them in that
Oh yeah. Well,
defining category.
yeah.
It's like those three. They can't have any of them get along. If any of those people start getting along, they got major fucking problems on their hands.
Yeah. So I think it's to prevent, an racial movement, solidarity from developing. Because think about the Freedom Convoy. It kills me that, if the Indigenous Solidarity Movement had allied with the Freedom Convoy, this pipeline wouldn't be getting built. We would have won.
Yeah.
But they have managed to divide people, so that, because it's the same thing what they do in the US, the Black Lives Matter thing, I think it's very successful at dividing the working class, and in Canada, the rural population is, 95% native or white. That's who lives in the rural areas, especially in the areas where most of the resource extraction is happening.
Right.
And so I think that what they fear most
Or
is,
where the green energy infrastructure is destroying the place.
yeah,
Because that's, just as if not more destructive than the oil extraction and the resource extraction. Those dams have fucking
Yeah.
shit up worse than anything, I would argue.
it's connected. I mean, the Site C dam is, I don't know. There's an industrialization agenda in the north. The situation in northern BC is what I'm most familiar with. But so I think it's ultimately about what it's about. It's about resource extraction, and they want, and so now that they can't sweep things under the rug anymore about residential schools, now I think they
I
want
would argue they want to make it about residential schools. They all that, whether they were fighting or not.
Mhm.
As long as we're paying attention to dead kids in residential schools and wearing orange shirts and worrying about getting back together, what we're not talking about is, hey man, you extracted $1 trillion worth of shit off a land that them treaties very clearly defines.
Yeah.
Well, not clearly enough, obviously, but they crammed us onto reserves, us assimilated Indian, so quotes, because I'm not on a reserve, but they crammed us onto reserves, and then they said that there's all this. The only way we were going to fucking agree to that, even though that there's a very good argument that they didn't know what the fuck was going on when they were,
Mhm.
and I would argue that they still figured they had the run of at least half of the country,
Mhm.
and but anyway, all that aside, there's giant areas, swaths of land outside of all of these reserves that are supposed to be dedicated to so that we can keep practicing our
Yeah.
natural shit. And over the last 150 years, $1 trillion worth of shit
Mhm.
has been taken out of those lands. Those exact lands,
Mhm.
not just some land up the road that some fucking people bought and some oil company bought and they're grabbing some oil out of it. Or they bought some, we're talking about this fucking, this is straight out of the lands. That's arguably, not arguably, in my opinion, that's Indian land. So you took shit out of Indian land. Before that, you were using damming the rivers and taking power and not, sharing the profits of it then. And all that sort of, and the real reason that they're distracting now is because there's about to be a giant fucking fight in the background because they want to extract another $1 trillion worth of rare earth minerals
Mhm.
out of that same fucking land. And there's still, we're stuck under this weird quasi. I think we got to be one of the only countries in the world that has the Indian thing not figured out at some level. Whether you can argue whether or not you agree with how some of these other places have figured out their Indian problem.
I think you're gonna like what I say, right?
They figured it out, and Canada hasn't. The U.S. has some weird Indian stuff, but for the most part, the Indians have their land. That's their shit. And once you're off that reserve, you're a U.S. citizen, and that's where that fucking ends. When you're on the reserve, you're the Indian. When in Canada, it's not like that. I'm an Indian everywhere I go. I got different rights than white people everywhere I go. And sometimes that puts me in a class nowadays where people might be envious of my position in one way or another. Whether hunting, I get to keep hunting, blah blah. But let's not forget that comes at the expense of my complete culture. I get nothing. There's I'm lucky I come from one of the Ojibwe, so there's there's a chance I can learn the language. There's some resources that have survived, but that's it, man. Everything else is fucking, we don't really know, because
Mhm.
it's just not fucking around anymore anywhere. It's just fucking gone. So that's, yeah, I get to hunt all the time. Would I rather see something figured out? Yeah. What do I want? I want my 160 fucking acres. That's what I want. Whether I got to split that with my dad because he's my other living sort of relative in that direction, or how that works out, but I don't know. Or I don't know how the fuck we untangle this mess. It should have got untangled 100 years ago. It never maybe should have got tangled up in the first place. But now we're in the problem where all these fucking European settlers, and I know that you didn't and Graham didn't, but
Mhm.
there was a long period of time, and 1.5 million people came
Mhm.
to Canada and got 160 acres just for showing up. Here you go. Here's this 160 acres.
Yeah, and it gets really uh, horrible when
How do we
you.
unpack that? So we got that problem that, so for 150 years, Indians didn't have their land. They couldn't mortgage it. They couldn't borrow against it. They couldn't sell their goods. It was illegal up until 1927 for Indians to even to combine funds for
Yeah,
legal representation. It was
yeah,
illegal. It was illegal to fucking group up and hire a fucking lawyer to defend your rights, because they knew they couldn't defend them in court in fucking 1930. Now, so I don't know how they unpack it, but they owe us a lot of land, and they
mhm.
owe us a lot of money and it's not, I don't know where that fucking money comes from, because
Here,
a lot of those corporations are, say, defunct, Gold Corp still
yeah,
made.
well, I
So
mean,
how does that come from? I don't want it to come from the taxpayer. The taxpayer didn't foot the bill for it, but there's a fucking major problem here. Now the taxpayer's already putting out a shitload of money, to prop up Indian infrastructure all over the place, that maybe, the Indians would be more interested in doing and expanding and upkeeping if they actually fucking owned it. Why would it's like fixing your landlord's shit?
what
Yeah.
we're heading towards is a situation where kind of all bets are off, because I personally think that the uh, U.S. dollar is going to fall as the global reserve currency, and that something else is going to replace it, and it's very hard to see that far forward. But I think that we are in Canada in the coming years in a potentially revolutionary situation, because if the Canada is a great place geographically to have a revolution, just because um, you know because of how spread out everything is, you know, um, the amount
Doesn't that
of,
make it difficult though?
well, it's makes it difficult to police. Like you could shut down, the area in which I am. There's one rail line, there's two ports, and all of the, yeah, and one highway. And it's all dependent upon infrastructure that is easily blockadable. And, that's happened before. That's happened during the Oak crisis. It's happened more recently in 2019 with what happened out here on Wet'suwet'en territory when they sent in the our heavily armed militarized police to raid a protest camp to force a pipeline through. And there's also a lot of support amongst the settler population for Indigenous struggles. So I do think that part of this, I think that, like, by turning people against each other, and by I'd like to actually read out just what some of my thoughts are about what could be the goals of this shame day thing.
Okay.
So,
Before you do that, can I ask you both a couple questions here just to finish off what we were talking about?
sure.
So Darren, that Nunavut map that you brought up, did they give some of that Nunavut territory back? Like, what does that mean in accordance with the rest of the?
So that fucking Nunavut is I don't have it anymore. I closed the tab, but Nunavut is self-governed. So Now they still didn't end up with all the mineral rights. I want to say at like 300,000 square kilometers, they only ended up with mineral rights over 30,000 of it or something like that. But you know, they ended up with a big chunk of land to sort of been left to their own devices.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So there's
and the interesting part of it is it amounts to 20% of the country.
well, what for area, like square
Yeah.
area? Well, yeah, but it's
I mean,
way
it's
up north. I mean,
nobody wanted the islands, but I mean, they're gonna find we weren't the government wasn't stupid enough to give them mineral rights over all them islands because they know they're gonna be up there pulling shit out of the ground eventually, which you know becomes again. So now they're gonna go up there and they're gonna pull shit off because they're only getting mineral rights over 10% of the land that they get to self-govern. So quote unquote self-govern, but you can only have mineral rights at 10%. You know, the other 90%, we think there's this, that, and that there. So that's our shit. But here you go. You know, that's how, which is, you know, maybe that's the negotiating way out. And you end take your 30,000 square kilometers and shut the fuck up. Because like I say, every other reserve in Canada amounts to like 28,000 on the heavy end. It might be closer to 26. It's somewhere in there. And it's not owned by Indians. And some of them are pathetically small. I mean, you go by some of the ones out by Highway 40 in Longview, the name escapes me. Oh shit, I should know, but
yeah, I
I
can't
don't
remember.
right now. Eden Valley, I think, or Eden something. It's Eden something. You know, it's so small they couldn't do anything. They just got crammed there, and now they're like surrounded by fucking shit. There's some public land down the road. You know, maybe I don't know. It's gonna have to come out of the public land now, I guess, if that's what we're doing.
Well,
Because
I don't even know if it'll happen. I mean, that's not even on the agenda. That's just certain people
no, I
pushing
don't
land
think.
back.
I
But
mean,
you know,
that's what the argue. That's the only way we're gonna go to get out of this Indian Act, though, is if giant swaths of land are gonna have to change hands, and I don't want it to come out of the private sector unless it's out of a corporate sector.
yeah,
Or some
totally.
foreign sector. But I don't think it matters because I think it's all gonna fucking collapse to the point of
That's my perspective.
you know where it doesn't fucking matter. What the Indians are just gonna that are on the reserves, they might as well own it because I don't think they're gonna be extracting minerals from it for a whole lot longer. You know, I think
There's
maybe
also
the oil is going to be the only real priority, if anything, for a long time.
So the other thing I have a couple quotes to read out of Darren's book too, in regard to like the recent million march. I mean, they were talking about this. This was a problem 100 years ago. But the other question I had for you, Crow, before we move on, is just about the schools, the Kamloops one. So because people have been calling this a hoax now, and I think that's what you're trying to explain is that this was sort of, you know, this was done in maybe in a part of a cemetery when I thought it was supposed to be like non-cemeterial burials, like
that was a
cemetery
different one.
burials.
The
That was
one
a different one.
I do a
And-
quote from a different one. Yeah, it's
okay.
I'm planning to. I have to go back to work tomorrow, so I don't know when I'll get around to it. But I want to post something about ground penetrating radar because, yeah, I was really shocked when I found out, you know, how, you know, this evidence is really not evidence.
Yeah. So was the plan to plant this in there, put the story out there, and then discredit it later on as well?
That's kind of what I'm thinking, but let me just read out what I think.
I'd rather they spent all that money searching the landfills, you know, for all these fucking bodies that are certainly buried there. You know, it's not a question of what's
I'd like to touch
where they're at.
The end of this interview is the missing and murdered women, because the thing is that, yeah, like the people who are, you know, again, anti-woke, who realize that, you know, that they're using kind of, you know, this intolerance in the name of tolerance thing in order to divide people, you know, then they might end up not believing that the abuses which did happen at residential schools were significant. And that's part of why I think they want you to focus on the deaths, because, you know, the deaths, you know, they're between like 2,600 on the low end, and, you know, like, I don't know, something like 4,500 on the high end. So, you know, compared just to the number of overdose deaths, you know, in Vancouver in, 1 year, that doesn't compare, right? But in terms of overall impact and significance, I'd say that the residential schools did much more damage. And so I think that they want us to focus just on the number, and then, then people can be like, like like however many hundreds of thousands of people have died in the Ukraine in the last 2 years, like, why are you talking about,
Well,
3,000
you also have to
dead
remember the
from-
fact that even though Indians are only 2.5% of the population, we're 10 to 12% of overdose deaths. So
Yeah,
that's still, a giant
And,
fucking
exactly.
and suicides.
It's counterinsurgency.
Suicide is fucking crazy. It's
Drug war.
crazy. It's 8 to 1. It's fucking 35 to 1 if you're Inuit.
Yeah, the stats are brutal. So let me just read this about so I say, now the woke ideology promoted by the Canadian state seems to have hijacked the idea of truth and reconciliation. I don't think that Trudeau's Liberals are motivated by any type of desire to rectify historical wrongs. I think they want to control the narrative around Indigenous genocide. I think Orange Shirt Day is about creating a new myth which accomplishes several disempowering propaganda goals simultaneously. Number one, they want Indigenous people to identify as victims rather than as warriors. Number two, they want Euro-Canadians to be ashamed of their privilege so they don't stand up for themselves as the government gets ever more authoritarian and insane. Three, they want to prevent Indigenous people and rural rights from joining forces to challenge the Canadian state. Four, they want to turn Indigenous people against Christians to prevent an interracial revolutionary political movement from forming based on shared spiritual values. Five, they want people to focus on the past crimes of the Canadian state rather than those that is committing in the present. For example, pouring gasoline on the overdose crisis by giving drug addicts drugs and calling that harm reduction. And then the last one is to promote a perverse kind of pan-Indigenous monoculture based on the shared experience of being oppressed. Because in reality, there is not one Indigenous culture in Canada. There's many. And but what do they all have in common? Well, they all have in common the experience of being oppressed by Canada. And so by kind of getting people to identify with that as who they are, then people are more likely to, I don't know, accept it if it's I think that that's a big part of it. But I think that more than anything, it's just to prevent solidarity. It's divide and conquer. And, this all took us quite a while to figure out, I think, because, they used to use race and gender to divide and conquer in one way. And then they started using it in a very different way. And it was incredibly weird. And, it took me a long time to figure out. Now I feel, oh, race and gender are ways to divide people. They can do it in one way or they could do it in another way.
Meanwhile, there's excess deaths among young people, especially, that they're just sweeping under the rug. I mean, nobody wants to talk about the real democide that's happening right now.
This is I go on a rant in one of my pieces about every child matters. Well, how about, when they were, locked down and prevented from playing and having normal childhood experiences for 2 years. This is going to have impacts,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Years forward. And so, every child matters. Great, but let's, you can't overthrow, the dead, so I think that they want you focusing on the past because, most of those people who are responsible for those crimes, those Mounties who stole the kids from the homes, and the priests and the nuns that did abuse those children, and the bureaucrats that oversaw all of that, the politicians that made the laws, the lawyers that enabled it all. Those people are dead, or they're very old. And so, but if they can redirect people's rage towards something that is in the past that can't be changed, then that they're not thinking about what can be changed, which is the present and the future. And I think that we're coming into a time where I'm really not sure what's going to happen. I think that it is World War III. The casualties in the Ukraine, they are real. A lot of people have died, and there's all these coups in Africa too, leading me to believe that there's a NATO BRICS kind of proxy war going on there too.
Mhm.
And guess what? Canada is between the U.S. and Russia. This is going to affect us. Especially the Northwest Passage is a major transportation route. It'll be it's one of the prizes to be won, and Russia is dominant in Arctic warfare. So how I think that we are we are being weakened in several different ways. I also do think that the harm reduction stuff is a counterinsurgency strategy. They've made drugs. Like I was always for the decriminalization. I was always against the drug war. But now we see kind of like victory kind of snatched. We see snatched away from us because it's, again, they like pour gasoline on a situation by giving drug addicts free drugs and like creating an environment in which they can kill themselves. And so to me, I think it was Gandhi that said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then they win. And I'm going to say that's not how it works. Here's how I've seen it work. I think that first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then they let you think you've won, then they pretend to be on your side, then they co-opt your movement, and then they win. And so that's what I think is going on with the Shame Day thing. I think that it's to take all the legitimate rage at the real injustices of residential school and kind of steer it into a dead end that prevents a movement that would be, motivated by indignation at these injustices to do something about it. Because I've seen alliances be built between settler activists and Indigenous defenders, and the success. There have been significant successes. I mean, the anti-fracking, they kicked the frackers out of New Brunswick. That's significant, and that's not what they want because Canada is, a resource colony. It's an extraction.
Yeah. Think about how much they fought back against the latest convergence of people, like the Million March, right? Happened all over the country, and it was Muslims and Christians and people that just want them to stay out of their kids' lives, right? Give the parental rights back. Yeah. And here's a quote from Darren's book, John A. MacDonald. Imagine what the Euro Canadians or even the woke Canadians would think if this was against them. When the school is on the reserve, the child lives with its parents, who are savages, and though he may learn to read and write, his habits and training mode of thought are Indian. He is simply a savage who can read and write. It has been strongly impressed upon myself as head of the department that Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from the parental influence. And the only way to do that would be to put them in essential training industrial schools where they will acquire the habits and modes of thought of white men. I mean, what if the tables were reversed, right? I mean, and so this has been going on 100 years, and they're still trying to take you away from kids from parents.
That's the first Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah.
I mean, I still don't think they should tear down his statues. I don't know that that's a.
And here's
I'm for just tearing the statues down, but to me, when it went to burning churches, that's where I drew the line, because I was like, there's a difference between the two,
And here's a quote from Duncan Campbell Scott. This is also in Darren's book. He was the deputy superintendent general.
Especially because most Indians are Christians or Catholic, so it's like that's just going to divide them even further. So burning them churches is just subdividing,
Yeah,
Dividing up Indian men.
I'd like to just read a quick thing about church burnings here, because, yeah, I say an attack on a church is different from the destruction of a statue. I support the destruction of statues of genocidal colonists such as John A. Macdonald, but the destruction of a church is different. For one thing, a church is not just a symbol. It is a community building where real activities take place. Weddings are held in churches, so are funerals. Community meals are held. Different kinds of meetings take place. A building serves real purposes to flesh and blood human beings, which a statue does not. But beyond this, an attack on a church is an attack on the members of that church. And if the members of that church are Indigenous, then these arsons are attacks upon Indigenous people. And so, like, the way that it was framed in the media was that, these Native people are, righteously enacting vengeance for past historical wrongs. But I think that more likely these were being burnt down by intelligence agencies, or I'm just going to say it, maybe Satanists. When a church gets burned down, like, look at what happened in Norway when, they were burning down churches there. Who was doing it? It's Satanists.
I mean, there's a good chance that we were able to get some fucking. I mean, there's a ton of kids on a bunch of these reserves that are mixed up. I mean, they haven't had proper. This is the first. The parents have only been back in the situation for a couple of generations, and half the time the alcohol is still a problem, drugs are still a problem. The suicide's a major problem. There's a bunch of problems that are sort of still sprawling out there that they're trying to recover from while going into that.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't rule it out, especially if it was just one,
like
2 or 3 or 5
kids that are drunk. Yeah.
And no one has been caught. If it was just like troubled kids, wouldn't one of them have slipped up by now? I mean, the Indigenous community reserves, they're often small places, and people talk, and people, would, I think, notice, have their, ideas about who might have done it, and, not one person. It's also like, it takes
I'm not ruling it out. I'm not ruling it out. I could definitely, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. And I guess I think that, when I look at propaganda, try and, figure out what they're doing, then it always gives you a hint of what they're afraid of, what the state wants to prevent. And I think that, I think that, I mean, a lot of rural whites are industry workers, or their family members are, or they're supportive of industry. And so, previously, although there is quite a bit of support, there was quite a bit of support for the anti-pipeline movement for people from, like, logging families up here. It's because guess what? They love the forest, they like fishing, they like hunting. They don't want to see it destroyed. They don't want to see, all of this happen so that they can send all of the resources to China. I mean, it's like a Chinese state-owned company that's, one of the major investors in this, talking about the Coastal GasLink pipeline. So there is, quite a bit of support, for Indigenous rights. I think that, like, we've come a long way from, the dark days of racism. Like, I'm working with a bunch of, like working class redneck types in my firefighting job. And, it's people are supportive. People, understand. There's quite a lot of, empathy for, for Indigenous people, based on the understanding which has emerged because of this, the years of truth and reconciliation. And people weren't aware before, and now they are. Like, I think that, but now I feel like that risks being lost, and that there'll be a backlash against Indigenous people, and especially if they, I think the truth is, Like at the beginning with this ground penetrating radar, I didn't hear anybody saying a peep, you know. And now, I don't know. I've been in the bush, you know, and before that I was in Mexico. So you guys would have a better, you know, read on where people are at with that one. What sense are you getting?
I can't follow it. It's been too crazy to follow. I mean, it's like the people are calling it a hoax now. People are saying like they're listening to the mainstream media. All of a sudden, the conspiracy theorists are always just listening to the media on this one. Oh, now all of a sudden they're not. It's not a real thing anymore. Oh, it was a real thing, and now it's not because the CBC says so. So I just don't believe anything that comes from the mainstream media. But I just have no idea what the truth is on it. It's one of those ones that's just so confusing to try and
A very
follow.
touchy subject.
Like, to me,
Yeah.
it's a non-issue. It's just a non-issue. Who cares? Who cares? I mean, I'm not trying to be callous because I get a bunch of kids died and that's terrible. And, you know, but I don't care if the graves are real. I don't really care about residential schools at this point. They happened. You know, I'm glad I'm not in one. I'm glad my kids aren't in one. But, you know, but there's, I'm sure, precedent for a lot of kids getting snatched off and going to school that were white, you know, all across the world back in the day, or boarding schools or church schools or whatever the fuck it was that the cult of Christianity was pushing. I don't really care about that. All I care about is fucking land, man. Let's figure out some land and let's figure out some fucking
and sovereignty
figure
too.
it out fucking fast. And that has to include sovereignty.
That's
Nation to
basically.
nation.
So I think maybe we could end on a positive note here, because I could tell you a bit about like a bunch of the people involved in the anti-pipeline movement just came to that conclusion. You know, is you know, let's not wait or let's not ask. Let's just go out there and take the land. And so now there are multiple land reoccupations out on the territory here in the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and the next one over is the Gitxsan. And so there's no land, there's no deeds granted by the Canadian state. People go out to places and they set up, they build cabins, you know, and there's a feast hall that's just been built out on Gidimt'en territory. My friends just went out to that yesterday. I was out at one that's called the Sovereign Leksamitsu Village, and there's 3 cabins, a summer kitchen, greenhouse, gardens, and a 4th cabin being built. And you know, kids from the community go out there, and you know, there is a movement of cultural revitalization, and you know, the movement goes you know, far beyond what the media generally portrays it as.
I think another positive part is that we're realizing that this whole civilized versus savages thing was completely wrong and backwards. I mean, the savages are the ones that are close to the land and they're in tune with nature. And we're being civilized to death, and we're sacrificing humanity on the altar of scientism, and it's wrong. It's all
100%.
you know. So their whole narrative that they've been doing this sort of genocide and eugenics on is all fucked up and backwards.
Yeah,
But people are realizing it.
To be clear, I am not anti-pipeline. I'm anti-steamrolling through Indian land and not negotiating with said Indians over X, Y, and Z. But I mean, here's the thing: most of them Indians want power, and most of them Indians want fuel, and you know, we need money to
We need
put
energy.
in all this infrastructure. If we want to be nation to nation for real, if we want to have sovereignty in our nation, that means we got to be able to pay for our own schools, pay for our own this, pay for our own that. We have to take that's real account. You know, we don't want to go just live in the bush. As much as I think I want to do that sometimes, that we need to evolve in our own way, whatever direction that is. But whatever direction it is going to involve energy. We're going to need money. We're going to need trade. We're going to need export probably to some extent. So I'm just anti blasting through all that shit. At the end of the day, I'm very pro pipelines. I'm very pro, you know, all of it. You know, I'm not going to put an oil and gas sticker on my truck because I think that's fucking gay as shit. I'm not saying I love oil and gas companies. No, I don't. You know, if I trusted the government in
Well,
any
there's
fucking way, shape, or form, I would argue that energy is one of the things that should maybe be owned by the fucking people. But
well,
the
one thing
government is
woke
fucking shit.
ideology also likes to gloss over, perhaps,
Well,
is
let me just finish
like
this up. Like you
think
want
that,
to talk about
and
living
that's
off the
true.
land. I went out today hunting with my daughters and
Cool.
the missus and shot grouse and ate them for dinner. And I shot grouse and we're parking the truck,
Mhm.
literally driving on roads that were put in place for fucking natural gas pipelines back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That's why the roads are there. That's you know, and a lot of the bush roads I hunt are because logging companies were back in the day. End of the day is I'm out there and I'm hunting deer and I'm hunting antelope. I'm hunting grouse. I'm hunting ducks. I'm parking at a fucking wellhead and I'm
Mhm.
walking 100 feet. Dude, I've shot antelope with my fucking gun on oil and gas infrastructure running, you know, still compressor stations. And then I go to my other spot where the fucking windmills have come in and where the solar farms have come in.
Mhm.
And it's all fucking gone. It's all gone. There's fucking nothing there. It's all moved on. It's if the windmills are there, the fucking deer are gone. They're fucking gone. The coyotes are gone. The deer are gone. If the fucking solar farm are there, it's just gravel. So now there was prairie and all this other stuff going on. Now they just fucking pave it. And it's just miles of fucking solar farms. So my as an Indian who lives off the land, probably to a larger extent than most Indians can say in 2023. You know, I still have a day job and all that, but you know, I got 450 pounds of wild meat of like 7 different fucking strokes in my freezer right now that we're eating for dinner 6 days a week, you know. So, you know, and I'm doing it in my truck. And like I say, I'm doing it, I would say, a lot more in tune with oil and gas than I am with the green energy all over the place. And the dams are fucking shit up more than anything. You know, I wasn't there in the 70s and 80s. It probably wasn't very huntable then. But I can tell you that if we're gonna keep this solar fucking farm, all of fucking southern Alberta is not gonna be huntable in 50 years because that's not coming back. It's got to be there forever. The oil is go in, wreck up the place a little bit. I'm telling you, it fucking comes back because I'm hunting on shit that was tore up 40 years ago. And fucking all the animals are there. Dude, I seen a 7-point fucking elk on Friday.
That is, yeah, and I think that it is true that things do go back. You know, like in, you know, where I am, everything's been logged. You know, and I think the Canadians have also gotten very used to being a rich country because of the incredible wealth of the land. But I do think that a lot of it has been taken. Like the trees have been cut. You go out there and most of them are not. You could put your hands around them. Um, in a lot of cases. And I think that it takes time. And I would hope that, we could, like I'm not against like cutting trees down, I'm against clear cutting, taking them all down. And I think that, that doesn't help the people, that doesn't, it means that there's less workers involved when it's just like, rape and scrape, it's, if it was, if it was more sustainable forestry practices, then there would be more people that would be involved in it. And the Burl forest is absolutely massive, and because it's so big, then there's been a very fuck it, there's just just go get some more. But hopefully we're able to evolve to a point where we can get what we want from the land without destroying it for future generations and for the other species that depend on it as well. And
They can stop spraying glyphosate on the forest.
Yes,
too.
very good idea. Very, very good idea. Like who does that benefit? It sickens me. The glyphosate, they're spraying glyphosate on fucking airplanes to kill the hardwood so the softwood grows bigger so they can cut it down before it's even big enough to lumber, fucking grind it up and fucking turn it into toilet paper. That's why you're spraying fucking pesticides of airplanes. Like, I don't know. I think that
Chemtrails, baby.
what's that?
That's them chemtrails.
Yeah. And I don't know, but I'm also very strongly of the opinion that what Canada needs is a yellow vest movement, you know, where people who have in the past been divided over, you know, issues like abortion or immigration or language is a big thing in back east, or you know that those people could come together and realize common cause. And I really do believe that in Canada now, the only solution is revolution. Canada has been a country for, well, supposedly a country for 150 years. In reality, it's a colony of the British Crown. And I think we need to fucking get rid of those guys. Personally, I'm an anarchist, so I don't envision. I might have one vision of the future, might be different from somebody else's, but I think that we can come together and agree that why the fuck are we governed by the fucking, you know, the royal family of England? You know, fuck that. You know, and why is there a Senate, and why is, why is this a monarchy? You know.
Why does Ottawa have any fucking say over what the fuck's going on in Alberta? That's what I'm wondering. Over what is going on fucking Indian land.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. What I believe in is a bioregionalism more, where, you know, there's, you know, like people should have you know, decision making power over, you know, some say in the decisions that affect them, you know, and that, you know, is going to tend to make more sense just based on a more local, smaller level, you know, and yeah, so that's what I'm for.
Crow, this has been fantastic. Where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, you can check out my Substack, nevermoremedia.substack.com. And we also have a website. We're nevermore.media, but I haven't posted the articles that I've been referencing on there yet. So I would encourage people to check out my Substack. You can follow us on Twitter as well. And yeah, stay tuned. I got a lot in the works, and but I'm gonna be heading out to the bush to work for the next 2 weeks. So I don't know. Maybe I'll find the time to post that ground penetrating radar stuff. But stay tuned for that, because that's gonna be a bombshell.
Crow, always a pleasure. Have fun in the bush.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks so much for having me on.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Take care.
And that was a chat with Crow Qu'appelle. What'd you think, buddy?
Yeah,
from
that
the new
was great.
studio?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, the studio's not quite finished yet, but at least I got the computer and the mic set up. So
you sound like a pro. We can't even tell you barely missed.
You can't hear the echo from no panels on the wall.
No, it's not too bad.
I can hear it definitely, but
yeah, no, it's not too bad. That mic is doing a pretty good job. Big thanks to Crow for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you're one of those people supporting our great work over here. Magnum Opus, gramerica.ca/support. If you can, when you can sign up for a monthly or make a one-time donation. This is a value for value show, so we can't do without you. Tell your friends about this show. Sign up for Gramerica Outlaw. That's our other one where we talk about sketchy shit. Not sketchy, maybe just spicy. I don't know. What's the word? Controversial. That'll definitely cover it. And stuff they don't want you to know about. And then we got the audiobooks, adultbrain.ca, Napoleon Hill. We're going to change the books like tomorrow. So if you guys want to download it, better do it pretty quick. I'm going to change them this week. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening. And we will see you next week.